In this week's parashiot, we have a double parasha. This week we're closing off Sefer Bamidbar, Chazak, V'nit Chazek. We have parashiot, Mattot, Masei. In the first parasha, Parashat Mattot, the very end of the parasha, we have the story of the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven. Two tribes who, after noticing how much wealth they had acquired over these years in the desert, as the pasuk says, Umiknei Rav, they had a lot of mikneh, a lot of cattle, a lot of sheep. Umiknei Rav hayad Bnei Reuven v'Bnei Gad atzum me'od. They had a lot of stuff. And when you have a lot of sheep, you have a lot of goats, a lot of cattle, you need place for them to graze. So they looked around and they noticed, wow, at the last couple of parashiot, we've been waging a bunch of wars on the east of the Jordan, and this land that we conquered on the east, it looks pretty good. There's a lot of grazing space for our sheep. So they make a request from Moshe Rabbeinu, and they say, Moshe, can we settle this land on the east of the Jordan instead of entering Eretz Yisrael proper? And for the next 22 pesukim, there's a back and forth between Moshe Rabbeinu and these two tribes, and Moshe's not happy with their request. This is not in Moshe's ideal. And why in the world would you guys want to stay on the less kadosh side? Why don't you want to make it into Eretz Yisrael proper? What kind of Jew would not want to live in Eretz Yisrael? Now, there are some approaches that are going to say that the east of Jordan has Kedusha. It was part of Hashem's bigger plan. Maybe it was part of the Goral. Seems like it was part of the covenant to Avram Avinu. But it's not so clear that right now, in this point in Jewish history, and we're about to enter Eretz Yisrael, that we've been dreaming about for 40 years, it's not so clear that it's supposed to be that right now they're supposed to be living on the east of the Jordan. And some say it's the Kedusha of the land of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. It only happens after the fact, meaning after this discussion, then now Hashem will make a kadosh also, and it's still going to be on a lower level of kedusha than Eretz Yisrael proper, than all the land on the west of the Jordan. Moreover, Moshe Rabbeinu actually gives them some musar even on the way they formulated their request, and he teaches them that when you're dealing with your request and what you're going to do, because they ultimately promise they're going to fight for the Jewish people, don't forget about your chinuch. The chinuch of your kids has to come first. You got to set them up first. So there's even a musar of how they ask the question. But in general, he's just upset. What kind of request is this? What's it going to do? Moshe Rabbeinu is the leader of all the 12 tribes. What's this going to do for the morale of the other tribes? They have to have a desire to fight. They're about to enter the land of Israel. And now we're going to see, two tribes say, oh, no, we don't want to enter. We're happy where we are. All the stuff we conquered until now, that's already good enough. And that makes a pressure on everybody else. That makes a pressure to maybe say, maybe we're going to follow with them also. Maybe we don't. Maybe it's not worth it. We have to now spend the next decades conquering Eretz Yisrael, and this affects unity. This affects morale. And they need to be ready to go be fighting in Eretz Yisrael, because we have the Canaanite nations to fight in Sefer Yoshua. But eventually, Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven were able to convince Moshe Rabbeinu to let them settle on the east of the Jordan, because they promised they're going to send their men, their toughest soldiers. The soldiers are going to go and they're going to fight with the rest of the tribes, brothers with brothers, hand in hand. They're going to fight until Eretz Yisrael is finally conquered, and only after that will they return to their families. And Moshe Rabbeinu finally accepts. Actually, I saw one approach brought down that he only accepted because he wanted to stop the machloket. He said, okay, this is worse. Machloket is even worse. Fine, we have to give it a little bit to them, even though it might not be the greatest good for them, but for the sake of all the unity of the Jewish people. But that's one approach. Other approaches say, okay, ultimately Moshe Rabbeinu accepts their request. But even in accepting, Chazal, looking to the future, they bring down there was a mistake over here. And how do we know there was a mistake? It wasn't 100% perfect, because the first tribes to go into exile are going to be from these Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. They're going to be the first to go out. So at the Siman, this wasn't the way it was supposed to be. Okay. But then, after Moshe Rabbeinu accepts, or as he's accepting, something interesting happens along the way. It says, "Vayiten lahem Moshe livnei Gad v'livnei Reuven v'lachatzi shevet Menashe ben Yosef et mamlechet Sichon melech Hemori." And Moshe Rabbeinu gives these Bnei Gad, these Bnei Reuven, and half the tribe of Menashe ben Yosef, a little bit of this land that they conquered, the land of the Sichon, the Amori, Og, all the stuff we've been speaking about in our last parashiot, all the land that we conquered on the east of the Jordan. Moshe Rabbeinu gives it to the Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, but then all of a sudden, he also gives it to half, Elachatzi, Shevet Menashe. Now, don't take the word half exact. The Chazal have all these details, how many families, how many were there. But what is this all about? Where in the world did Menashe come from? I don't get it. It was Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven. They made the request, and all of a sudden, Menashe now is now thrown in with everybody else, with those two tribes. What's that all about? So, Bezrat Hashem, I want to start with some of the more classic approaches, even some of the deeper approaches we've said in previous years, just to get a little bit of general idea, just to get a little background, and then Bezrat Hashem, we're going to get into this year's big idea, this massive chidushim on why was half of Menashe chosen to be with Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven on the east of the Jordan. Okay, so let's start off with the Ramban. Ramban Nachman is of Moshe ben Nachman. He starts off very simple. V'lachatzi shevet Menashe ben Yosef. What does that mean? Mitchila lo ba'u lefanav shevet Menashe. Says the Ramban. Originally, shevet Menashe they never came forward. It wasn't their idea. They weren't part of the original idea. Aval kasher chalak haaretz lishnei hashvatim ra'ashi eretz gedolah yoter min ha'ro'oi lahem. But when Moshe Rabbeinu finally started to divide up the land, he was giving Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven their land. Moshe Rabbeinu just saw how vast this was, a really large territory. Ubikesh mishe yirtzeli nachenim, and Moshe Rabbeinu put out a request. Who wants to come and join Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven? It looks like they might need a little bit of help. It's a very large area of land. We need some more people there to populate the area. And he says, and there were some people from the tribe of Menashe. They wanted to come. It could be they were also, could be some people of Menashe when there was this request. Who wants to come out? Kol Koreh. Who wants to come and join them? A couple of people from a couple of families from Menashe. They stood up. They said, we're going to join them. And the Ramban says, maybe we could even say, maybe they were very rich too. Maybe they had a lot of cattle also. And Moshe Rabbeinu gives them a chelik with Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven. That's just simple Ramban trying to fill in the blanks. The Haiskuni, based on a Midrash, this Midrash Rabbah, Perik Peidalid, a little bit more ominous. So he says, he starts off the exact same way, that they themselves, lo shalulem nachala. Originally, they didn't want nachala be'eretz Sichon ve'og. That wasn't their idea. Rak b'nei Reuven ve'gad shalu. It was really only Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven's idea to stay on the east of the Jordan. So what are they doing there? But he says, since their father, and who's their father? Their father is Menashe. Ayin in the Midrash itself was a little bit clearer in the language, because their father, meaning if you go back to the story of the brothers with Yosef, when the brothers didn't know that Yosef was the Mishneh LaMelech, they didn't know he was second in command, and they thought they were standing in front of the Tzafnat Pa'aneach. After having a very good dinner, thinking they finally made a reconciliation, they got Shimon. The 11 tribes start to travel back. But Yosef had Menashe place the gavia, the silver goblet, the cup, into Benjamin's knapsack to make the next part of the story, where ultimately they're going to be caught, be brought back, and there's the back and forth. Veigash Yehuda, when Yehuda finally steps it up against Yosef, and we had the reconciliation finally of the brothers. But this first stage was a very depressing stage, because when they find the goblet, when they were going from knapsack to knapsack, and they finally get to Binyamin's Yalkut, and they finally find inside there the cup, so now the tribes freak out, and Karu Bigdehem. So he says, Shavihem Garam them Ashvatim, Shakaru Bigdehem. Menashe was the active guy that was involved in this whole plan. He caused that those tribes would rip their clothing. So therefore, because he made them rip their clothing, so to speak, his portion itself was ripped in half, and now he has part on this side of the Jordan, part on that side of the Jordan. It's kind of like a bit of a midah kedek midah. When you open up the Midrash Rabbah goes through how Yosef and Yosef's other kids and then future kids, all the way down to Mordechai, we're going to have ourselves stories of ripping up clothing and ripping up things that take place as part of a tikkun for the pain that was given to the Shvatim, that they had to rip their clothing. So Menashe, their father of this half of Menashe, because their great-great-great-grandfather made the Jewish people rip their clothing, so now the tribe of Menashe gets ripped in half on this side, half on that side. That's why they were separated away. That's the Chizkuni. Okay. We mentioned a couple of years ago, based on Rabbi Khan, that if you look closely, that all the tribes on the east of the Jordan, the Bnei Gad, the Bnei Reuven, the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, they are firstborns. They're Bechors. And now Menashe, he's a firstborn of Yosef, but these are the firstborns who never got their double portion. They never got the Bechor normally gets 2 parts of land. Ultimately, Yosef is the one to get the double portion. So therefore, Yosef gets land for both Ephraim and Menashe. But even in Ephraim and Menashe, then Ephraim becomes the Bechor, even though he was the younger one and not Menashe. So Menashe is lacking in part of his Bechor. So he says it could be this is the part of the land that the Bechors want to go to because, they feel maybe a little bit gypped. They didn't get their double portion. But in the east of the Jordan, it's more of like a free-for-all. We saw the Ramban said that like Moshe Rabbeinu putting out a request. Who wants to move out here? There's so much land over here. Just go conquer it. You have to be a little bit tough. But if you conquer it, it'll be yours. So it looks like maybe this is the land of the Bechors. And that's why we have Menashe comes over here, because he wants to get a double portion. So he has one portion in Israel proper, and now he goes for a second portion in the side of the east of the Jordan. And this actually works very well, because eventually we're going to find in the Nach that the tribe of Dan was also one of the firstborns. So Dan himself only got one portion, was supposed to be in the Tel Aviv area, but he had trouble conquering it. So eventually he goes out to the north, he goes up to the northern area by Syria, he goes to Laish, to Leshem. It's actually even known as Dan already in the times of Avraham Avinu, and a trippy idea for a different time, but he couldn't hold on to his portion in Tel Aviv and Gush Dan area, so therefore he also goes past the Jordan up north over here. He's going to the Syria area, he's going to the north, but he's also in an area outside. It seems like the Bechors, they're looking for a second portion on the other side of the Jordan. Okay. Reason number 4, approach number 4, we mentioned in the past a Kabbalistic idea. Beyond the scope of this Dvar Torah, but there seemed to have been a problem with Reuven and Gad in their conception. And so too with Menashe. Menashe himself had something in his lineage that was a little bit off. So they explained that by Menashe, he came from a quarter non-Jew. Why? His father was Yosef, fully Jewish. His mother, according to at least one midrash, his mother, Osnat bat Potifera, according to one midrash, she was actually the daughter of Dinah, but she was the daughter of Dinah after the rape of Shechem. So half of Osnat came from the evil Shechem, came from the non-Jew. So therefore, if you take Yosef and Osnat's kids, we have Ephraim and Menashe. 3/4 of them come from the Jewish roots. Yosef comes fully from Yaakov and from Rachel. Osnat comes a half from Dinah. So now 3/4 of Ephraim and Menashe come from Jewish. 1/4 comes from non-Jewish, from Shechem. So therefore, 3/4 of the land goes it goes in the eastern part of the Jordan. So 3/4, the full portion to Ephraim, and the half portion to Menashe goes in Israel proper. And the last quarter that comes from that kind of relates somehow to that Shechem side, to that non-Jewish part, that part couldn't get land in Eretz Yisrael proper. It has to go to the more external Chutz La'aretz part that's somehow connected as an addition to Eretz Yisrael. Okay, that's a Kabbalistic idea. But I found most commentators, they actually come in a more positive outlook. That when you're wondering, what is Bnei Menashe, what is half of Menashe doing on the east of the Jordan, they actually write positive things. So another approach I saw is that this is a way to keep both sides of the Jordan River connected to each other. That if we have parts of the same tribes, the same family on both sides, then they'll go back and forth, they're going to stay united, and through their unity, through these families going back and forth, it's going to keep the connection for the other tribes as well. Meaning now that there are Jews from the east of the Jordan that are coming back to the west of the Jordan, and vice versa, it's going to create that everybody on the east of the Jordan and everybody on the west of the Jordan will be a little bit more connected. Okay. Approach number 6 says the Netziv in the Emek HaDavar. He writes, and he brings down that Menashe, according to some Chazals, were Talmidei Chachamim. They were Rashi Yeshivot, similar to the tribe of Levi, and in certain aspects Shimon, that were supposed to be teachers. So apparently the tribe of Menashe also had itself some of the learners. In the Yisachar Zevulun, Yisachar is the learner. Menashe seems to be the Yisachar part as well. They had apparently Talmidei Chachamim and Rashi Yeshivot. And he says Moshe wanted to make sure that the Torah wouldn't be forgotten on the east of the Jordan as well. This east of the Jordan is not part of Israel proper. It's not right next to Yerushalayim. You don't have the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael proper. What are you going to do? So if you send some of the Rashi Yeshivas, you send some of the Talmidei Chachamim, send over parts of the tribe of Menashe, they'll make sure there'll be Torah there as well. Similarly, that's another idea that the modern commentators, they focus not on the Torah aspect, but on the Chibat Haaretz, the love of the land of Eretz Yisrael, the Ohavei Eretz Yisrael. We know that Yosef, we spoke about last week, Yosef, his 2 sons, Ephraim, Menashe, the Benot Tzlov, they loved Eretz Yisrael. They were Chovevei Haaretz. So Moshe wanted to make sure that those who choose not to come into the main Eretz Yisrael are still going to be around people who love and value Eretz Yisrael. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he went to the half of Menashe and said, please, you guys love Eretz Yisrael. Can you please go be with the rest of your brothers? Can you go hang out with Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven? So at least they have that spark to want to make it back to Eretz Yisrael, to want to be part of Eretz Yisrael proper. A last idea that I saw was that Ephraim and Menashe, they're Yaakov Avinu's grandchildren that were raised in the Galut and still were Jewish, despite not having that typical Jewish education that you expect that the rest of the grandchildren had in Eretz Yisrael proper. But yet, they were still able to maintain their identity. And that's part of one of the reasons that we give down, that why do we bless our kids to be like Ephraim and Menashe every single Friday night and not like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Because ultimately, Yitzchak was born in Eretz Yisrael, was raised in Eretz Yisrael, Yaakov was born there, raised there, but then ultimately ended up in Galut. But Ephraim and Menashe are the two kids who were raised in Galut, and the rabbis realized, we realized, Moshe realized, Yaakov realized, our tradition realized that a lot of our history is going to take place in the Galut. So we're going to need a bit of that koach of Ephraim and Menashe to make it through the Galut. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu understood that as well. So he took a bit of them. He took half of Menashe, and he says, "You guys, you go hang out with those other two tribes so they could thrive even though they're not in Eretz Yisrael proper." Okay, so those are the 8 primary approaches we've spoken about in the past. In part 2, I want to focus on a new awesome approach that speaks about the special koach of the tribe of Menashe. Shabbat Shalom.